Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jennifer, and you are listening to the Ego Next Door podcast. Today, we are going to discuss the challenges of overcoming feelings of boredom and readaptation after prolonged stress and traumatic experiences. Understanding this will help improve your quality of life, your relationship with others, and teach you how to emotionally regulate. Adjusting to a sense of normalcy can be incredibly difficult after enduring prolonged periods of stress. When we talk about these high stress periods, it could be anything from an intense phase at work or school with tight deadlines to being part of a chaotic friend group or, more severely, experiencing a psychologically or physically abusive relationship. There is a common misconception that recovery from stress or trauma follows a linear path. However, the reality is far different. Regardless of the duration of the stressful period, whether brief or prolonged, recovery can be equally long and multifaceted. It involves not just psychological recovery, but also physiological changes, many of which are invisible to the eye. As author Bessel van der Kolk famously wrote, "The body keeps score." This means that our bodies store stress in various areas, including the brain and other anatomical parts, which can lead to significant health issues later on. These can include high blood pressure, a weakened immune system, and even deeper problems related to the body's learned responses to stress. This is particularly evident for those who were raised in high-stress, toxic, and traumatic environments where safe spaces were pretty much non-existent. In such cases, the body may associate moments of stillness with the freeze response, a survival coping mechanism. It becomes challenging to differentiate between true relaxation and what is essentially a freeze response, where the body remains trapped in a state of vigilance. This is where self-awareness comes into play. Understanding not just our emotional state, but our physical responses as well. For example, growing up, I was conditioned to associate stillness with laziness. My mother would tell me that relaxing was for people with no ambition and that I should always be striving for more. Even when I achieved perfection, it wasn't enough. This ingrained belief set the stage for my addiction to stress. Later in life, I entered a relationship that reinforced these patterns. My partner at the time would call me relentlessly, even when I was asleep, accusing me of being lazy if I didn't answer the calls. The constant cycle of feeling like I had to prove my worth through relentless action became my norm. If you can relate to this in any way, but aren't sure if you have a problem with relaxing and doing nothing, consider this. When you're sitting still, whether doom scrolling on your phone or binge watching a TV show, do you feel refreshed afterwards, or do you just feel as drained, if not worse, than before? If the answer is the latter, you may be caught in the aftermath of prolonged high stress. But how do we rediscover what emotional baseline is? How do we learn to reset our bodies? First, we need to understand what is baseline. Baseline refers to the state one returns to after experiencing emotional arousal. In periods of prolonged stress, our bodies spend too long in this arousal state, and so many have trouble returning to baseline. In other words, we experience difficulty regulating our emotions. In a way, one could assume that someone raised in high-stress environments would naturally consider stress their emotional baseline state. But the truth is, people who have never truly experienced relaxation often crave it unknowingly. This manifests as chronic illness, sudden injuries, muscle fatigue, exhaustion, recurrent sickness, or autoimmune vulnerabilities. Understanding why this happens is important. As human beings, we strive for a long, healthy life and quality of life. The only way to achieve this is by giving our bodies what they need to restore and regenerate, both mentally and physically. This doesn't just apply to visible physical conditions. It also encompasses how we become so accustomed to stress that we don't know how to exist without it. This reliance on stress may lead to behaviors where we seek out people and environments that perpetuate this negative cycle. In other words, chronic stress can lead to addiction to stress. The neuroscientific explanation for this is actually quite fascinating. Our brains trick us because besides releasing cortisol, stress also releases dopamine, which, as you may know, is a feel-good chemical that activates the reward area of your brain. Thus, instead of using relaxation as a way to return to our emotional baseline for true restoration, we may find ourselves in cycles of workaholism, extreme perfectionism, or experiencing even more intense symptoms if we already live with disorders such as OCD. This is what may lead us to surround ourselves with people who keep us in this state of heightened stress, reflecting the freeze response we grew accustomed to. Also keep in mind that this can happen in any type of relationship, platonic, romantic, or even professional, where the addiction to stress converts into the addictions to the highs and lows of emotional turmoil. And while literature and music often romanticize this emotional roller coaster as making life feel more vibrant, it ultimately undermines our well-being. So, if you have ever wondered why you tend to attract or stay around people who create drama or uncertain situations, relationships that keep you on edge, or situations where you're walking on eggshells, it could be a sign that your body is resisting a return to emotional baseline. After all, when you have endured prolonged stress or abusive relationships for long enough, trauma responses don't just become momentary reactions. They shape you. The question then becomes, how do we make that return? The answer might sound simple, but in practice, it is challenging. We must do the things that feel boring or wrong, things that don't align with what we perceive as our usual selves. So, yes, healing is boring. It is so boring that it will require a very good reason for you to actually decide to continue healing. Sitting through the boredom and accepting it as a healthy norm? Boring. Even frustrating. And our brains will attempt to make us relapse into our usual stressed selves. But you must resist. One thing that may be helpful is understanding the risks of perpetuating the cycle of prolonged stress and lack of emotional regulation, setting all fire alarms in our brain and not allowing us to simply exist. So, let me share a personal story that can serve as a cautionary tale. As previously mentioned, I have always been a perfectionist, addicted to work or any activity that kept me mentally and physically occupied. At one point, sports became my outlet. They allowed me to push my body to its limits while mentally keeping me in a cycle of perfectionism. But eventually, my body reached its breaking point. Despite the constant warnings from people around me that my body could not keep up, I couldn't stop. Relaxing felt not only wrong, it felt impossible. The only way I felt alive was by staying in motion, to the point of self-harm disguised as health and fitness. Then, my body forced me to stop. The burden of stress became so heavy that I couldn't get out of bed. I was immobilized. Only at that moment did I start to realize that my body was sending a loud message. Enough is enough. If I wanted to continue living, let alone enjoy simple activities like cooking a meal, going for a walk, or playing with my cats, I needed to radically change my lifestyle. I needed to learn how to stop. The physical rest was unavoidable, but mentally, I was still restless. I felt just as uneasy lying in bed as I did running kilometers or lifting weights. The idea of not doing anything felt exhausting and wrong. This realization was important. It meant I needed to embrace the boredom and stillness, to sit with my discomfort and let my body truly rest. Observing the sensations in my body, even the uncomfortable ones, was the hardest exercise of all. But it's what we have to do. We have to practice being bored. Fidgeting is allowed. This is necessary for returning to emotional baseline for people like us. Over the past years, I have made significant progress. It's not always easy, especially when it comes to the relationships I maintain. This aspect is an ongoing challenge. In fact, the way this impacts romantic relationships was where I noticed it most. I realized that I only found interest in people who kept me psychologically on edge, thinking that intensity was a sign of love. But in reality, it was just stress disguised as passion. That kind of constant anxiety isn't healthy, and it doesn't make love real, it makes it destructive. As you can see, this is what prolonged stress can do to us. Not only can it affect our physical and emotional health, but it can dictate how and with who we choose to spend our time with. By learning to nourish yourself and giving your body and mind what they need, you will build a stronger foundation for both existing and future relationships of any kind. The good news is that with practice and intention, feelings of boredom and apathy will subside. Remember, your body is not designed to endure high stress every second of every day. If it were, there wouldn't be so many adverse side effects of prolonged stress. On the next episode, we will delve deeper into the nature of emotional roller coasters, exploring the concepts of deep sensitivity and highly sensitive people. We will also touch on borderline personality disorder, a topic that is very close to my heart. This exploration is a crucial step towards breaking these patterns and moving towards a life defined by peace rather than chaos. Thank you for listening to the Ego Next Door podcast. See you soon, and I hope you have a wonderful day. If you enjoyed today's episode and would like to hear more, don't forget to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel at Ego Next Door. And if you would like to support my work, consider becoming a patron to my Patreon creator page at Jennifer Hachia. The Ego Next Door podcast is presented solely for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. The content here is not intended to serve as a substitute for the consultation, diagnosis, or medical treatment of a qualified healthcare provider. Reliance on any information provided here is at your own risk. If you or someone you know is in crisis or experiencing suicidal thoughts, please reach out immediately to someone who can help right away. Call your national emergency services or go to the nearest hospital.